The flames had already consumed half of Helena Abbott's dress shop when she stumbled out into the dirt street of Aurora, Colorado, her hands blackened with soot and her eyes streaming tears that had nothing to do with the smoke. It was March of 1878, and the wind that whipped down from the Rocky Mountains carried embers like fireflies across the wooden buildings that lined the main thoroughfare, threatening to take the entire town with it. Helena stood there in nothing but her nightdress and a wool shawl she had grabbed on her way out, watching everything she had worked for during the past 3 years disappear into ash and cinder. The dress shop had been her independence, her escape from a past she had run from back in St. Louis, and now it was gone. She did not cry out or wail like some of the other women who had gathered in the street to watch the disaster unfold. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her bare feet cold against the March earth, her body trembling not just from the chill but from the realization that she had nowhere to go. The room above the shop where she had lived was already engulfed, and with it went her clothes, her savings hidden in a tin box under the floorboards, the few photographs she had of her mother, and every piece of fabric and thread she had accumulated to build her business. She was 24 years old and she had nothing. The bucket brigade had formed, men passing water from the creek that ran behind the buildings, but it was futile. The fire had taken hold too quickly, fed by the dry wood and the relentless wind. Helena watched Marcus Cole join the line, his tall frame moving with practiced efficiency as he hauled buckets alongside the shopkeepers and ranchers who had come into town. She knew him by sight, had seen him ride through Aurora on his way to, and from the ranch he worked on the outskirts of town, but they had never spoken. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that seemed permanently weathered by sun and wind. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, simple and practical, and he moved with the kind of quiet purpose that suggested a man who did not waste time on unnecessary things. When the roof of her shop finally collapsed in a shower of sparks and the men gave up their futile efforts, Helena found herself simply standing there as the crowd began to disperse. Some of the townswomen approached her with sympathetic words and offers of a meal, but she could barely hear them over the roaring in her ears. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, offered her a room for the night, but Helena knew she had no money to pay for it beyond that single evening. Everything was gone. She was still standing there an hour later when the fire had burned down to smoldering ruins, and most people had returned to their homes and businesses. The sun had fully risen now, casting harsh light over the destruction, and Helena felt exposed and vulnerable in her nightclothes with nowhere to go. She should move, she knew, should accept Mrs. Patterson's offer and figure out what to do next, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. "Miss Abbott." The voice startled her, and she turned to find Marcus Cole standing a respectful distance away, his face smudged with soot and his shirt damp from the water buckets. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a striking blue-gray, serious and direct. "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse from smoke. "I am sorry about your shop," he said, and unlike the sympathy she had heard from others, his words carried a weight that suggested he understood what loss meant. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Helena opened her mouth to say yes, to maintain the pride that had carried her through 3 years of building a life alone in Colorado, but the word would not come. Instead, she found herself shaking her head, a gesture so small it was barely perceptible. Marcus studied her for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. "I have a cabin about 5 miles north of here," he said. "It is not much, but it has a roof and a stove. You are welcome to stay there until you figure out what comes next." "I could not impose," Helena said automatically, though even as she spoke the words she knew she had no other options. "It is not an imposition," Marcus replied. "The cabin sits empty most days while I am working the ranch. You would actually be doing me a favor, keeping the place lived in." They both knew this was not entirely true, but Helena appreciated that he was offering her dignity along with shelter. She looked back at the smoking ruins of her shop, then at the man standing before her with his sincere eyes and quiet strength. "I will pay you back," she said. "Once I get back on my feet, I will repay your kindness." "That is not necessary," Marcus said, "but we can talk about it later. Right now, you need to get warm and get some rest. Wait here and I will bring my horse around." He left before she could protest further, and Helena wrapped her shawl more tightly around herself. She should feel afraid, she thought, accepting the offer of a strange man to go to an isolated cabin. But something about Marcus Cole's straightforward manner and the careful way he kept his distance told her that his offer was genuine and without ulterior motive. Besides, what choice did she have? When Marcus returned leading a sturdy bay horse, he had also procured a blanket from somewhere. He handed it to Helena without comment, and she wrapped it around herself gratefully. Then he swung up into the saddle and reached down to help her up behind him. Helena hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and letting him pull her up. She settled behind the saddle, acutely aware that she was wearing only her nightdress and that she would need to hold on to this stranger to keep from falling off. "You will want to hold on," Marcus said, his voice even. "The trail can be rough." Helena placed her hands tentatively on his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. Then Marcus clicked to the horse and they moved forward, leaving the ruins of her old life behind. The ride north took them out of Aurora and into the rolling hills that led toward the mountains. The landscape was still brown from winter, but Helena could see the first hints of green beginning to emerge in the protected valleys. Marcus did not try to make conversation as they rode, for which Helena was grateful. She was exhausted and overwhelmed, and she needed the silence to process what had happened. Her shop was gone. Her home was gone. She was riding off with a man she did not know to a place she had never been, with nothing but a nightdress and a borrowed blanket. The cabin appeared in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, small and weathered but solid-looking. Smoke curled from the chimney, which surprised Helena until she remembered that Marcus had said it was not far from the ranch where he worked. He must come here regularly. Marcus dismounted first and then helped Helena down, his hands careful and impersonal. She stood in the clearing, the blanket clutched around her, and looked at the cabin that would apparently be her home for the foreseeable future. "It is just one room," Marcus said, leading his horse toward a small lean-to stable. "But the stove works well and the roof does not leak. There is a creek about 50 yards that way through the trees." He unsaddled the horse and turned it into the stable before walking back to where Helena still stood. She saw him take in her bare feet and soot-stained nightdress, and something flickered across his face. "Come inside," he said. "We need to get you warm." The cabin's interior was indeed just one room, but it was clean and well organized. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the space, and a cast iron stove radiated heat in the corner. Shelves held supplies and a few books, and pegs on the wall supported spare clothes and gear. It was sparse, but it felt lived in, cared for. "Sit by the stove," Marcus instructed, and Helena obeyed, sinking into one of the chairs and holding her hands toward the warmth. Marcus moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire and putting a kettle on to boil. Then he pulled a trunk from under the bed and rummaged through it. "These were my mother's," he said, pulling out a simple cotton dress and a shawl. "She passed 2 years ago." The dress might be a bit short on you, but it will be warmer than what you have on." Helena accepted the clothes with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus nodded and turned his back, giving her privacy to change. Helena quickly stripped off her ruined nightdress and pulled on the cotton dress. It was indeed a bit short, falling just past her ankles instead of to the floor, and it was loose through the bodice, but it was clean and whole, and she was grateful for it. The shawl was thick wool, and she wrapped it around her shoulders like a blessing. "I am decent," she said, and Marcus turned back around. He looked at her for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a softness that had not been there before. Then he cleared his throat and turned to the kettle, which had begun to whistle. "I do not have much in the way of food here," he said, "but I can make tea, and there is some bread and preserves." "That sounds wonderful," Helena said, and realized she was ravenous. She had not eaten since the previous evening. Marcus prepared the simple meal and set it on the table. They ate in silence, Helena too hungry and too overwhelmed to make conversation, and Marcus seeming content with the quiet. When she had finished, Helena felt the exhaustion crash over her like a wave. "You should rest," Marcus said, clearing the dishes. "Take the bed. I need to get back to the ranch anyway. I will return this evening." "But where will you sleep?" Helena protested. "I have bedding at the ranch," Marcus said. "Do not worry about me. You need to recover from what you have been through." He was already gathering his things, clearly intent on leaving her alone to rest. Helena wanted to protest further, but her body was betraying her, her eyes heavy and her limbs leaden. "Thank you," she said again, knowing the words were inadequate but having nothing else to offer. Marcus paused at the door and looked back at her. "You are safe here," he said simply. "Rest easy." Then he was gone, and Helena was alone in the quiet cabin. She made her way to the bed and lay down, pulling the quilts up to her chin. The pillow smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, and despite everything, despite losing everything, Helena felt herself relaxing. Marcus Cole's words echoed in her mind. "You are safe here." And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. She woke to the sound of the door opening and sat up in alarm, her heart pounding, before she remembered where she was. Twilight filtered through the single window, and Marcus was entering the cabin, his arms laden with supplies. "I did not mean to startle you," he said, setting the bundles on the table. "I brought some things from town, clothes, food, necessities." Helena stood and approached the table, staring at the packages. "You did not have to do this. I have no way to pay you back." "We will figure that out later," Marcus said, unpacking the bundles. There were 2 more dresses, a nightdress, undergarments still wrapped in paper, a pair of boots, a hairbrush, and more food than Helena had seen in one place in months. "This is too much," she protested. Marcus stopped unpacking and looked at her directly. "Miss Abbott, you lost everything." "These are basic necessities. If the situation were reversed, I suspect you would do the same." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since the fire. "I do not understand why you are helping me," she said. "You do not even know me." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hand still on the supplies. "5 years ago I lost my parents in a flash flood," he said finally. "One day they were here, the next they were gone, and so was our ranch house and most of our livestock. I was left with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a few head of cattle that had been on higher ground. A rancher named Samuel Carter gave me work and a place to sleep, asked for nothing in return except honest labor. He told me that was how people survived out here, by helping each other when times got hard." Marcus looked up at Helena, his eyes serious. "You need help right now. I am in a position to give it. It is as simple as that." Helena wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "It does not feel simple." "Maybe not," Marcus acknowledged. but it is what needs to be done." He finished unpacking and then began preparing dinner, moving around the small cabin with the ease of someone accustomed to caring for himself. Helena watched him, this quiet man who had opened his home to a stranger, and felt something shift inside her chest. "Let me help," she said, standing. Marcus glanced at her. "You should rest." "I have been resting all day," Helena countered. "Please let me do something useful." They prepared the meal together in the small space, and Helena found comfort in the simple domestic tasks. Marcus had brought potatoes and salt pork and onions, and together they created a hearty stew. As they worked, Helena found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way he moved with quiet confidence, the way his hands were scarred and calloused from hard work, the way he seemed completely comfortable with silence. They ate at the small table as full darkness fell outside, and this time Helena felt strong enough to attempt conversation. "How long have you worked for Mr. Carter?" she asked. "5 years now," Marcus replied. "Since right after I lost my parents. He has been good to me, better than I probably deserved when I first started. I was angry back then at God and fate and everything else. But working the cattle and the land, it helped, gave me purpose when I thought I had lost mine." "And this cabin?" Helena asked, looking around. "I built it 2 years ago," Marcus said. "After my mother passed, I needed my own space. Mr. Carter understood. The ranch house was getting crowded anyway with his sons growing up and starting families. This suits me." "It is a good cabin," Helena said. "Solid." Marcus's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. High praise from a woman who just lost her home. Helena was surprised to find herself almost smiling back. "I mean it. You can tell it was built with care." They lapsed back into silence, but it was a comfortable one. After dinner, Marcus insisted on cleaning up while Helena sat by the stove. She watched him work, this stranger who had become her unexpected savior, and tried to figure out what she was going to do next. "I need to find work," she said suddenly. "I cannot simply stay here doing nothing." Marcus dried his hands on a cloth and turned to face her. "What did you do before the dress shop?" "I was a seamstress," Helena said. "In St. Louis, I worked in a factory making men's shirts. When I came to Colorado, I wanted to have my own business, make dresses for the women in town. I built it slowly, saved every penny." She stopped, her throat tight. "And now it is all gone." "You still have your skills," Marcus pointed out. "The shop is gone, but you can still sew. Maybe someone in town needs a seamstress." "Maybe," Helena said, though she did not sound convinced. "I just do not know if I can start over again. It took everything I had to build that shop the first time." Marcus pulled the second chair closer to the stove and sat down facing her. "When I lost my parents and the ranch, I thought my life was over," he said. "I was 22, and I had spent my whole life working toward the day I would take over the family business. Then in one afternoon, it was all washed away. I spent months just going through the motions, working for Mr. Carter because I needed to eat but not really caring about anything." "What changed?" Helena asked. "One day I was out checking fence line and I found a calf that had gotten separated from its mother," Marcus said. "It was half-starved and would have died if I had not found it. I brought it back and nursed it to health, and watching that scrawny little thing grow strong again, it reminded me that life keeps going even after loss, that there was still purpose to be found, still things worth caring about." He looked at Helena steadily. "You will find your way forward, Miss Abbott. It might not be the same path you were on before, but that does not mean it will be a lesser one." Helena felt fresh tears threatening and blinked them back. "I hope you are right." "I am," Marcus said with quiet certainty. "Give it time." That night, Marcus spread his bedroll on the floor near the stove despite Helena's protests. "The floor is fine," he insisted. "I have slept on worse. You take the bed." Helena had no strength left to argue. She changed into the new nightdress Marcus had bought, acutely aware of him on the other side of the cabin trying to give her privacy in the small space, and climbed into the bed. From her vantage point, she could see Marcus's form near the stove, his back to her, and she found herself studying the set of his shoulders and the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. "Marcus," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything." "You are welcome, Helena." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep, steady voice made something flutter in her chest. She closed her eyes and, despite everything, fell asleep feeling safer than she had in a long time. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Helena woke to find Marcus already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. She dressed quickly behind the privacy of a blanket Marcus had hung from the rafters, touched by his thoughtfulness, and joined him at the table. "I need to spend the day at the ranch," Marcus said, pouring her coffee. "Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Helena said, though the prospect of spending the day by herself in the isolated cabin was somewhat daunting. "I will keep the cabin tidy and maybe wash those soot-stained clothes from the fire." "The creek is through the trees in that direction," Marcus said, pointing. "Follow the deer path and you cannot miss it. Do not wander too far from the cabin, though. There are mountain lions in these hills, and while they usually stay clear of people, it is better to be cautious." Helena nodded, filing away the warning. Marcus finished his coffee and gathered his things, then paused at the door. "I will try to come back at midday to check on you," he said. "You do not need to do that," Helena protested. "I will be fine." "Maybe so," Marcus said, "but I will come anyway." After he left, Helena set about organizing the cabin. It was already clean, but she needed something to do with her hands and her mind. She made the bed with hospital corners, washed the breakfast dishes, and swept the floor. Then she gathered the ruined nightdress she had worn during the fire and made her way through the trees to the creek. The water was icy cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountains, and Helena's hands quickly turned red as she scrubbed the fabric against the rocks. The soot and smoke smell would not come out entirely, but she worked at it anyway, needing the physical task to keep her mind occupied. When she finally gave up and spread the nightdress over a sunny rock to dry, she sat back and looked around. The forest was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that was so different from St. Louis. Pine trees towered overhead, their needles sighing in the breeze, and she could hear birdsong and the chatter of squirrels. The creek tumbled over stones, clear and cold and eternal. It was peaceful here in a way that the town had never been, and Helena found herself understanding why Marcus had built his cabin in this isolated spot. She thought about what he had said the night before, about finding purpose after loss. She had been so focused on building her dress shop, on creating independence and security for herself, that she had not considered what she would do if it was all taken away. But Marcus was right. She still had her skills, still had her hands and her mind. She could start over, even if the prospect felt overwhelming. Helena returned to the cabin and spent the rest of the morning mending a tear in one of Marcus's shirts that she found draped over a chair. True to his word, Marcus appeared at midday with bread and cheese for lunch. "How was your morning?" he asked, noticing his shirt neatly folded on the table with the tear repaired. "Productive," Helena said. "I hope you do not mind. I needed something to do." Marcus picked up the shirt and examined the mend. "You do fine work," he said, and Helena warmed at the simple praise. They ate lunch together, and then Marcus headed back to the ranch, promising to return that evening. Helena spent the afternoon going through the supplies he had brought, familiarizing herself with her new temporary home. She found herself thinking about Marcus more than she probably should, remembering the steady way he looked at her and the quiet kindness in his actions. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. And yet there was something about him that made her feel grounded, like maybe she could survive this disaster after all. That evening they fell into an easy routine. Marcus prepared dinner while Helena set the table, and they ate together talking about small things. Marcus told her about the cattle drive that would be starting in a few weeks, and Helena shared stories about some of the more difficult customers at her dress shop. It felt surprisingly natural, this domestic scene, and Helena had to remind herself that this was temporary, that she could not simply stay in Marcus's cabin indefinitely. As the days passed into weeks, a pattern emerged. Marcus would leave early for the ranch and return in the evenings, and Helena would spend her days keeping the cabin organized and working on small sewing projects. Marcus had brought her fabric and thread from town, and she had started making a new shirt for him as a way to repay his kindness. She knew it was inadequate payment for everything he had done, but it was something. They talked more easily now, sharing stories from their pasts and their thoughts about the future. Helena learned that Marcus had grown up on the ranch his parents had homesteaded, that he loved working with horses, that he read whenever he could and had a particular fondness for adventure novels. Marcus learned that Helena had left St. Louis to escape an arranged marriage her uncle had tried to force on her after her mother died, that she loved the freedom of Colorado despite its hardships, that she dreamed of someday having her own dress shop again. "You will," Marcus said with certainty when she voiced this dream one evening. "Maybe not in Aurora, but somewhere. I do not know if I have the courage to try again," Helena admitted. "What if it all falls apart again? Then you start over again," Marcus said simply. "That is what living is, Helena, building and rebuilding. The alternative is to give up, and I do not think you are the giving up type." Helena looked at him across the table, at his serious face and steady eyes, and felt something shift inside her. When had she started looking forward to his return each evening? When had his presence become the thing that anchored her day? "How did you get to be so wise?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Hard experience," Marcus replied, but there was warmth in his voice. "And stubbornness. My mother used to say I was too stubborn to know when I was beaten." "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Marcus said softly. "You remind me of her sometimes, the way you keep going even when things are hard." Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the comparison. "That is quite a compliment. It was meant to be." Their eyes met across the table and Helena felt her breath catch. There was something in Marcus's gaze, a warmth and an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Then Marcus looked away, clearing his throat, and the moment passed. But later, as Helena lay in the bed and listened to Marcus's breathing from his bedroll by the stove, she found herself wide awake, thinking about the way he had looked at her. She was being foolish, she told herself. Marcus was helping her out of kindness, nothing more. He had given no indication that he thought of her as anything other than someone who needed assistance. And yet, she could not stop thinking about him. A month after the fire, Helena accompanied Marcus into Aurora for the first time. She needed to see if there was any possibility of salvaging anything from the ruins of her shop, though she held out little hope. As they rode together on Marcus's horse, Helena was acutely aware of his solid warmth in front of her, and the way her arms wrapped around his waist to hold on. It felt intimate in a way that made her nervous and excited all at once. Aurora looked the same as always, bustling with people going about their business. But when Helena saw the burned-out shell of her shop, now just a pile of charred wood and broken dreams, she felt the loss hit her all over again. Marcus helped her down from the horse and they stood together looking at the ruins. "Do you want to look through it?" he asked gently. Helena nodded and picked her way carefully through the debris. Most everything was destroyed beyond recognition, reduced to ash and twisted metal. But in what had been her storeroom, she found her sewing shears, blackened but intact, and the iron frame of her dress form. She gathered these treasures carefully, knowing they were all she would recover. "Miss Abbott, how wonderful to see you." Helena turned to find Mrs. Patterson hurrying toward her, followed by several other women from town. They surrounded her with exclamations and questions, and Helena found herself explaining where she had been staying and thanking them for their concern. "We were so worried," Mrs. Patterson said. "When you disappeared after the fire, we did not know what had become of you." "I have been staying at Mr. Cole's cabin," Helena explained, gesturing to where Marcus stood at a respectful distance. "He has been very kind." The women exchanged looks that Helena could not quite interpret. "How generous of Mr. Cole," Mrs. Patterson said carefully. "You must be eager to return to town properly, though. I still have that room available at the boarding house if you need it." "I have no money for room and board," Helena said quietly. "Not until I can find work." "About that," said Mrs. Winters, the wife of the general store owner. "My sister in Denver is looking for a skilled seamstress to work in her dress shop. The pay is decent, and she provides room and board for her employees. I could write to her on your behalf if you are interested." Helena felt a flicker of hope. "That would be wonderful, thank you." "It would mean leaving Aurora, though," Mrs. Patterson pointed out. "Leaving your friends here." Helena glanced over at Marcus, who was tending to his horse and not watching their conversation. Leaving Aurora would mean leaving the cabin, leaving Marcus. The thought created an unexpected ache in her chest. "I will think about it," Helena said. "Thank you for the offer." After extricating herself from the women with promises to consider the Denver position, Helena rejoined Marcus. He helped her tie her salvaged items to the saddle, his hands careful with the charred objects. "You could have a fresh start in Denver," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "It is a bigger city, more opportunities." "I suppose," Helena said, though the idea held less appeal than it should have. They rode back to the cabin in silence, and Helena found herself leaning closer to Marcus's back than was strictly necessary, memorizing the feel of him. She was being ridiculous, she told herself. She had only known him for a month. She should be excited about the possibility of a job in Denver, of a new beginning. But she was not excited. She was miserable at the thought of leaving. That evening, the easy comfort that had developed between them seemed strained. Marcus was quieter than usual, and Helena found herself unable to make conversation. After dinner, as they cleaned up together, Helena finally broke the silence. "Mrs. Winters' sister might not even want to hire me," she said. "It could all come to nothing." "But if she does want to hire you, you should take the position," Marcus said, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. "It is a good opportunity." "Is it?" Helena asked. "Starting over in a new city where I know no one." Marcus set down the pot and turned to face her. "You did it once before when you came to Aurora. You can do it again." "What if I do not want to?" The words came out before Helena could stop them, raw and honest. Marcus stared at her and something flickered across his face. "Helena." "I have been happy here," she continued, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "Happier than I have been in a long time. I know this is your home and I have been imposing, but I do not want to leave." "You are not imposing," Marcus said roughly. "That has never been the issue." "Then, what is the issue?" Helena asked, taking a step closer to him. Marcus turned away, gripping the edge of the table. "The issue is that you deserve better than living in a one-room cabin in the middle of nowhere with a cowboy who has nothing to offer you. You deserve a real fresh start, a chance to rebuild your life properly." "And what if this feels like a real life to me?" Helena asked softly. What if I do not want anything more than this? Marcus's shoulders tensed. You say that now, but in 6 months or a year you will regret it. You will feel trapped and resentful, and I will be the fool who convinced you to throw away a good opportunity. Helena moved around the table so she could see his face. Is that really what you are worried about, or are you afraid of something else? Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and Helena saw everything she had been feeling reflected in his eyes. The connection between them, the growing feelings neither of them had acknowledged, the fear of taking a risk that might end in more loss. I am afraid of caring about someone and losing them again, Marcus admitted quietly. I am afraid of asking you to stay when I have so little to offer. I am afraid of being selfish. Helena reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars under her fingers. What if I want you to be selfish? She asked. What if I want you to ask me to stay? Marcus's hand tightened around hers. I cannot ask that of you. Why not? Because you lost everything in that fire, Marcus said. And I do not want you to settle for less than you deserve just because you are grateful for help. Is that what you think this is? Helena asked, hurt creeping into her voice. Gratitude, is it not? Marcus challenged, though his tone was more uncertain than accusatory. Helena took a breath, gathering her courage. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is whether you will make it back at midday or if I will have to wait until evening to see you. When I hear your horse coming down the trail, my heart beats faster. When we sit together in the evening, I feel more at home than I ever did in my shop above the dress store. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes. That is not gratitude, Marcus. That is something much more complicated and terrifying. Marcus stared at her, his expression a mixture of hope and fear. You have only known me for a month. I know, Helena said, and maybe I am being foolish. Maybe I am just confused after losing everything, but it does not feel that way. It feels real. Helena, Marcus said, her name almost a groan. If I ask you to stay, if I tell you what I want, there is no going back. Then tell me, Helena said. Take the risk. For a long moment, Marcus just looked at her, his blue-gray eyes searching her face. Then he lifted his free hand and cupped her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses. I want you to stay, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I want you to stay here with me in this cabin that suddenly feels empty when you are not in it. I want to come home to you every evening and tell you about my day. I want to hear you laugh and watch you sew and argue with you about who makes better coffee. He paused, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. I want to court you properly and see where this goes between us. And if that makes me selfish, then I am selfish. Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. That does not sound selfish. That sounds perfect. Marcus smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face, and Helena felt her breath catch. Then he was leaning down and she was rising up on her toes, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tentative and certain all at once. It was not a long kiss, just a brief press of lips that tasted like coffee and promise, but it sent warmth flooding through Helena's entire body. When they pulled apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? He asked. About staying, about this, I am sure, Helena said. Are you? I have never been more sure of anything, Marcus replied. They stood there for a long moment, foreheads touching, hands intertwined, savoring the feeling of having finally acknowledged what had been building between them. Then Marcus pulled back slightly, his expression turning practical. We should do this properly, he said. I will court you the right way. We will take our time and make sure this is real. It is real, Helena said with certainty. Even so, Marcus insisted. I want to do right by you. Helena smiled at his seriousness. All right, court me properly then. Over the following weeks, Marcus made good on his promise. He brought Helena wildflowers from the meadows near the ranch. He took her on rides through the hills, showing her the places he loved. He read to her in the evenings from his adventure novels, his deep voice bringing the stories to life. And slowly, carefully, he kissed her goodnight before retiring to his bedroll by the stove. Helena wrote to Mrs. Winters and politely declined the offer to connect her with the Denver position, explaining that she had decided to stay in Aurora. She also began taking in sewing work from women in town, riding into Aurora with Marcus once a week to pick up and deliver projects. The money was not much, but it was a start, a way to rebuild her independence even as she built this new relationship with Marcus. They talked about everything during those weeks. Helena told Marcus about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother's death from consumption, and her uncle's attempt to marry her off to a business associate twice her age. She explained how she had taken her mother's small inheritance and fled west, determined to build a life on her own terms. Marcus shared more about his parents, about growing up on the ranch and learning to work cattle and horses. He talked about the flood that had taken them, about the dark months afterward when he had questioned whether there was any point in continuing. He told her about rebuilding his life with Mr. Carter's help, about slowly finding purpose again in the work and the land. "I thought I would always be alone," Marcus admitted one evening as they sat by the creek watching the sunset. "After my parents died, I could not imagine letting myself care about anyone that much again. The risk of loss felt too great." "And now?" Helena asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Now I think the risk of not taking a chance on this on us is greater," Marcus said. He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "I love you, Helena. I did not plan on it and I am probably saying it too soon, but it is the truth." Helena's heart felt like it might burst. "I love you too," she said. "And you are not saying it too soon. I have known for weeks. I just did not have the courage to say it first." Marcus kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Helena wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the feeling she had been holding inside. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Helena pulled back to look at him. "What? Marry me," Marcus repeated. "I know we have only known each other for 2 months. I know you might want more time. But I am certain about this, about you, about us. Marry me, Helena." Helena felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Marcus let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob, and kissed her again. Then he pulled her close, and they sat there by the creek as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, holding each other and planning a future neither of them had expected but both desperately wanted. They were married in Aurora 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church. Mrs. Patterson and the other townswomen helped Helena make a new dress for the occasion. White cotton with delicate embroidery that Helena worked on in the evenings by lamplight. Marcus wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Helena felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. Mr. Carter attended as Marcus's witness, a gruff man in his 50s with kind eyes who shook Helena's hand and told her she was getting a good man. "One of the best I have known," he said. "You treat him right." "I will," Helena promised. After the ceremony, the townspeople held a small reception with cake and cider. Helena was surprised and touched by how many people came, how many well wishes they received. Even though she had lost her shop, she realized she had not lost her place in this community. As the sun began to set, Marcus lifted Helena onto his horse, and they rode back to the cabin together as husband and wife. Someone had tied tin cans to the saddle and they rattled cheerfully as they rode, and Helena laughed for the pure joy of it. The cabin looked the same as always when they arrived, but everything felt different. This was not just Marcus's home anymore. It was their home. Their beginning. Marcus helped Helena down from the horse and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. Helena let out a surprised laugh as he carried her over the threshold, setting her down carefully inside. "I believe that is the tradition," he said, looking suddenly uncertain. "It is a good tradition," Helena said, reaching up to cup his face. "I love you, Marcus Cole." "I love you too, Mrs. Cole," Marcus replied, and the name sent a thrill through Helena. That night they came together as husband and wife, the small cabin filled with whispered words and gentle touches. Marcus was careful with her, almost reverent, and Helena felt tears slip down her temples at the tenderness of it. This was what she had not known she was looking for when she built her dress shop, when she focused so intently on independence and security. This partnership, this intimacy, this love. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Helena rested her head on Marcus's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I cannot believe this is my life now," she said softly. "2 months ago I had nothing. Now I have everything." Marcus's arms tightened around her. "You gave me purpose again," he said. "I did not realize I had been just going through the motions until you came into my life. You made me remember what it felt like to look forward to something, to care about something beyond just surviving day to day." "We saved each other then," Helena said. "I think we did," Marcus agreed. They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, and when Helena woke the next morning to find Marcus still beside her in bed instead of already gone to the ranch, she smiled. This was her life now. This was home. The seasons turned, and their life together found its rhythm. Marcus continued working for Mr. Carter, but he spoke often of his dream of rebuilding his family ranch someday. Helena's sewing business grew as word spread of her skill, and she started saving money again, this time in a jar that she and Marcus kept on a shelf together. "For the ranch," she said when she added to it. "For our future." They talked late into the night about what that future might look like. A real ranch house with multiple rooms. A barn and stable for horses. Cattle grazing in the meadows. Maybe even children someday, though they agreed they were in no rush. 6 months after their wedding, Mr. Carter approached Marcus with a proposition. He was getting older, he said, and his sons were more interested in moving to Denver to pursue other opportunities than in running cattle. He wanted to sell off a portion of his land, and he was willing to give Marcus first option to buy, with payment plans worked out over time. Marcus came home that evening barely able to contain his excitement. "It is the eastern section," he told Helena, spreading a hand-drawn map on their table. 1,000 acres, including the creek and good grazing land. He is willing to let me pay it off over 10 years at reasonable interest. Helena studied the map, her mind already calculating. "We have saved some money, but not enough for the down payment he will want." "I know," Marcus said, his excitement dimming. "I will need to figure out how to raise more capital." Helena was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she looked up at Marcus with determination in her eyes. "What if we combined our savings and I took in more sewing work? If I could get orders from Denver and not just Aurora, I could charge more and work faster." "That would be a lot of work for you," Marcus said. "And I do not want you feeling like you have to. I want to," Helena interrupted. "This is our dream, Marcus. Let me help build it." They worked together over the next year with single-minded focus. Marcus took on extra work at the ranch, including breaking horses, which was dangerous but paid well. Helena sewed late into the night, her fingers flying over fabric as she completed commissions for women in Aurora, Denver, and even as far as Colorado Springs. They ate simply, spent nothing on luxuries, and added every extra penny to their savings jar. It was hard work, and there were moments of exhaustion and frustration. But they faced it together, encouraging each other when one of them felt discouraged, celebrating small victories when they reached savings milestones. Finally, a year after Mr. Carter had made his offer, Marcus and Helena sat at their table and counted out their savings. They had enough for the down payment with a small amount left over for emergencies. "We did it," Helena said, hardly believing it. "We actually did it." Marcus pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. "No, you did it," he said. "I could never have managed this without you." "We are partners," Helena reminded him. "We did it together." The purchase went through in the spring of 1880, and suddenly Marcus and Helena Cole were landowners. They spent their first evening walking the boundaries of their new property, hand in hand, talking excitedly about all the possibilities. "We will need to build a house," Marcus said. "The cabin is fine for now, but eventually we will need more space." "And a barn," Helena added. "And proper fencing." "It will take years," Marcus warned. "We are starting from almost nothing." Helena thought back to the night of the fire, to standing in the street in her nightdress with literally nothing to her name. Then she looked at Marcus, at their land stretching out around them, at the future they were building together. "We are starting with much more than nothing," she said. "We are starting with each other." They built the ranch slowly over the next few years, one project at a time. Marcus and Mr. Carter's oldest son constructed a barn the first summer, working from dawn to dusk in the heat to get it finished before the first snow. Helena painted the barn red with white trim, standing on a ladder for hours until her arms ached. The next year they added fencing and purchased their first cattle, a small herd that Marcus tended with the care of someone who understood how precious these animals were. Helena helped with the ranch work when she could, learning to rope and brand despite her initial hesitation. She was stronger than she looked, Marcus told her proudly, and Helena felt that strength growing in her every day. The cabin that had once housed just Marcus now held both of them and all their shared dreams. It was crowded, especially as they accumulated tools and supplies for the ranch, but neither of them minded. At night, they would curl up together in the narrow bed and talk about the house they would build someday, describing every room in detail. "A real kitchen," Helena would say, "with a proper stove and counters for baking. A big fireplace in the main room," Marcus would add, "where we can sit in the winter. A bedroom just for us," Helena would continue, "and maybe another room or two for." She would trail off and Marcus would pull her closer, both of them thinking about the children they wanted but had not yet been blessed with. It was a source of quiet sadness for both of them, though they tried not to dwell on it. "When it happens," Marcus would say. "We have time." In the spring of 1882, 4 years after the fire that had destroyed Helena's old life, they finally had enough saved to begin building their ranch house. Marcus designed it himself, drawing and redrawing plans until Helena threatened to hide his pencils. It would be modest by some standards, but to them it was a palace. A main room with a fireplace, a separate kitchen, a bedroom, and a loft space that could be divided into rooms later if needed. They hired a crew from town to help with the construction, and Marcus worked alongside them, coming home each evening covered in sawdust and grinning with satisfaction. Helena prepared meals for the workers and helped where she could, and slowly the house took shape. When it was finally finished in late summer, Marcus once again carried Helena over the threshold, this time into a home they had built together from the ground up. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole," he said, setting her down in the main room. Helena looked around at the solid walls and the stone fireplace and the windows that let in golden afternoon light. She thought about the dress shop she had lost, about how she had believed that building her own business was the key to happiness and security. She had been wrong, she realized. This was security, Not buildings or businesses, but the life she and Marcus had created together through hard work and partnership and love. "It is perfect," she said, and meant it. They moved their belongings from the cabin to the house, which did not take long since they still had relatively few possessions. But as Helena arranged her sewing supplies in the corner of the main room that would be her workspace, and as Marcus hung his parents' wedding picture above the fireplace, the house began to feel like home. That night they christened their new bedroom, making love in a real bed with a proper frame instead of the narrow cot they had shared in the cabin. Afterward, lying in Marcus's arms, Helena felt a wave of contentment wash over her. "Are you happy?" Marcus asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I am more than happy," Helena said. "I am complete." A few months later, Helena woke early one morning feeling queasy. She made it outside before being sick in the bushes by the porch, and when she straightened up, she found Marcus standing in the doorway looking concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked. Helena paused, mentally counting days and weeks. Then she felt a smile spread across her face. "I think I might be pregnant," she said. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then crossed the porch in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests that she might be sick again. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe," Helena cautioned, though she was fairly certain. "It is still early." But as the weeks passed and her body changed, there was no doubt. In the spring of 1883, they would become parents. Marcus became impossibly protective, insisting Helena rest more and lift less. Helena tolerated his hovering with amused patience, knowing it came from love and the fear of loss that still occasionally haunted him. She continued her sewing work, but scaled back to fewer commissions, and she helped with light ranch work, until Marcus finally convinced her to focus on preparing for the baby. Helena sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands creating impossibly small garments. Marcus built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. They talked endlessly about names and what kind of parents they wanted to be and how their life would change. "I am scared," Helena admitted one evening as they sat by the fireplace, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother?" Marcus pulled her close as her belly would allow. "You will be an amazing mother," he said firmly. "And nothing will go wrong. We have come too far and overcome too much for fate to be cruel now." "You cannot promise that," Helena said. "No," Marcus agreed, "but I can promise that whatever happens, we will face it together." Helena leaned into his strength and believed him. When her labor started on a warm April evening, Marcus immediately went into town to fetch the midwife while Helena tried to remain calm. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Fletcher, arrived quickly and took charge of the situation with brisk efficiency. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Marcus paced outside the bedroom door, and several times Mrs. Fletcher had to order him away when his worried face appeared. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Helena gave one final push and a baby's cry filled the house. Marcus burst through the door despite Mrs. Fletcher's protests and found Helena propped up in bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundled infant. "A boy," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. "We have a son." Marcus approached the bed slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the squirming infant. He had dark hair like Marcus and what looked like it might be Helena's gray eyes, and he was perfect. "Can I hold him?" Marcus asked, his voice unsteady. Helena carefully transferred the baby to Marcus's arms, and Marcus stared down at his son with an expression of pure wonder. "Hello," he said softly. "I am your father." The baby squinted up at him, and Marcus felt something in his chest crack open. A rush of love so intense it was almost painful. He had thought he knew what love was, had thought what he felt for Helena was the deepest feeling possible. But this was different, this fierce, protective tenderness toward this tiny person who had not existed until a few minutes ago. "What should we name him?" Helena asked. They had discussed names endlessly but had not made a final decision. Now, looking at his son, Marcus knew. "Matthew," he said. "After my father. Matthew James Cole." "Matthew James Cole," Helena repeated, testing the name, then she smiled. "It is perfect, Mrs." Fletcher stayed for a few more hours to make sure both Helena and the baby were stable, then departed with instructions for their care and promises to return the next day to check on them. Finally, Marcus and Helena were alone with their son. "I cannot believe he is real," Helena whispered, watching Matthew sleep in the cradle Marcus had made. "That he is ours." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. "You were so brave," he said. "I have never been more terrified than I was today, listening to you labor." "It was worth it," Helena said simply. "He is worth it." They stayed like that for a long time, sitting together in the quiet evening light, watching their son sleep and marveling at how completely their lives had changed. The early weeks with Matthew were exhausting and wonderful. He was a hungry baby who woke frequently in the night, and Helena and Marcus took turns walking him when he fussed. The house that had seemed so spacious now felt filled with baby things. Drying laundry, swaddling blankets, the cradle moved from room to room so they could always keep Matthew near. Marcus adjusted his ranch work schedule so he could be home more, and he discovered he had a talent for soothing the baby. Helena would often find them together, Marcus murmuring to Matthew about the ranch and the cattle and the mountains, and Matthew staring up at his father with solemn eyes. "He knows your voice already," Helena said one morning, watching them together. "He knows yours too," Marcus replied. "You should see how he calms when you sing to him." As Matthew grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a serious baby, more likely to study his surroundings intently than to smile easily. But when he did smile, it lit up his whole face. He had Helena's gray eyes and Marcus's dark hair, and he was already showing signs of his father's quiet determination. When Matthew was 6 months old, Helena cautiously resumed some sewing work, working during his naps and in the evenings after he went to bed. She had missed the creative outlet, and the income helped as they continued to build the ranch. Marcus had expanded their herd and was planning to take cattle to market in Denver that fall. "Are you sure you will be all right alone with Matthew for a week?" Marcus asked as he prepared for the cattle drive. "We will be fine," Helena assured him. "Mrs. Carter said she would check on us every day, and I have everything I need." "I do not like leaving you," Marcus said, pulling her close. "I know," Helena said, "but this is important for the ranch. We need this sale." Marcus bent down and kissed Matthew, who gurgled and grabbed at his father's hair. "You be good for your mother," Marcus instructed. Then he kissed Helena long and deep. "I love you." "I love you too," Helena said. "Come home safe to us." The week Marcus was gone felt long, but Helena managed well. She fell into a routine with Matthew, tending to the essential ranch chores and keeping the house running. When Marcus finally returned, dusty and tired but with money from a successful cattle sale, Helena ran out to meet him with Matthew in her arms. Marcus swept them both into an embrace, burying his face in Helena's hair. "I missed you so much," he said. "We missed you too," Helena replied. "Matthew kept looking for you." "Did you?" Marcus asked his son, taking him from Helena. Matthew grabbed Marcus's nose and babbled something, and Marcus laughed. "I will take that as a yes." That night, after Matthew was asleep, Marcus and Helena celebrated his successful sale. The money would allow them to make improvements to the ranch, maybe even hire some help so Marcus did not have to do all the work himself. "We are really doing it," Helena said as they lay in bed afterward. "Building something that will last." "We are," Marcus agreed. "And it is all because you were brave enough to accept help from a stranger 4 years ago." "You were brave enough to offer it," Helena countered. "Not everyone would have done that." "I think I knew even then," Marcus said thoughtfully, "that you were going to change my life." "For better or worse," Helena teased. "Definitely for better," Marcus said, pulling her close. "I was just existing before you, now I am living." The years continued to pass, marked by Matthew's milestones and the ranch's steady growth. Matthew took his first steps in the main room, wobbling from Marcus to Helena with a look of fierce concentration. He said his first word at 14 months, "Papa." Helena pretended to be offended that she was not first, but she was secretly delighted by the joy on Marcus's face. When Matthew was 2, they hired a hand named Tom to help with the ranch work. He was a young man from town, hard-working and reliable, and his assistance allowed Marcus to spend more time with his family. Helena's sewing business had also grown, and she now had regular clients in Denver who paid well for her custom work. "We should think about expanding the house," Marcus said one evening. "Adding another bedroom. Are you planning something I should know about?" Helena asked with a smile. "I am always planning something," Marcus replied. "I want more children, Helena. Matthew needs siblings." "I would like that too," Helena said, "but it happens when it happens." 2 years later, when Matthew was 4, Helena gave birth to twin girls. The pregnancy had been harder than her first, and the birth left her exhausted for weeks. But looking at her 2 daughters, identical down to the tiny dimple in their left cheeks, Helena felt her heart might burst with love. "2 at once," Marcus said in wonder, holding both babies with practiced ease. "We are outnumbered now." They named the twins Sarah and Emily, and Matthew was fascinated by his new sisters. He would sit next to their cradle and tell them stories, his serious little face so like Marcus's that Helena sometimes had to laugh. Life with 3 children was chaotic and busy. The house that had felt spacious now felt crowded, and Helena and Marcus agreed they needed to build the addition sooner rather than later. But despite the exhaustion and the constant demands, Helena had never been happier. "Remember when I lost everything in that fire?" she asked Marcus one night as they collapsed into bed after finally getting all 3 children to sleep. "I remember," Marcus said. "I thought my life was over," Helena said. "I thought I had lost my chance at happiness and security." "And now," Marcus prompted. "Now I realize I had to lose everything to find what really mattered," Helena said. "You, our family, this life we built together. The dress shop seemed so important at the time, but it was nothing compared to this." Marcus pulled her close. "I found my purpose the day I helped you," he said. "I had been drifting, working and eating and sleeping, but not really living. You gave me a reason to care again, a reason to build something lasting." "We gave each other that," Helena corrected. "We saved each other." Over the following years, the ranch continued to prosper. Marcus and Tom expanded the herd and improved the grazing lands. Helena's sewing brought in steady income, and she trained several young women in town in the trade, passing on her skills. They added 2 more bedrooms to the house and built a proper workshop for Helena behind the main building. Matthew grew into a capable young man who loved working the ranch with his father. The twins, while identical in appearance, had very different personalities. Sarah was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. Emily was quieter and more studious, spending hours reading and helping her mother with sewing projects. When Helena turned 40, Marcus threw her a surprise party. The house was filled with friends and neighbors, all of them celebrating not just her birthday but the life she and Marcus had built. As Helena looked around at the crowded main room, at her husband and children and friends, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Make a wish," Marcus said, bringing her a cake that the twins had helped him bake. Helena closed her eyes and thought about what she could possibly wish for. She had a loving husband, healthy children, a successful ranch, good friends, and a community that had embraced her. She had rebuilt her life from nothing and created something more beautiful than she could have imagined. She opened her eyes and blew out the candles, but she did not make a wish. She did not need to. She already had everything. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Marcus and Helena sat on their porch watching the stars. It had become their ritual, these quiet evening moments together after busy days. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not offered you shelter that day?" Marcus asked. "Sometimes," Helena admitted. "I probably would have taken the position in Denver. I would have rebuilt my life somehow." "But would you have been happy?" Marcus asked. Helena thought about it. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I might have built another successful business. I might have made a good life for myself, but I do not think I would have known what I was missing." She turned to look at him, this man who had given her shelter and found his own purpose in the process. "I do not think I would have known what real happiness felt like." Marcus took her hand, his thumb rubbing the worn gold band she wore. "I was so afraid to care about anyone after losing my parents," he said. "I thought if I kept my heart closed, I could protect myself from more loss. But you taught me that closing yourself off is not protecting yourself. It is just a slow kind of dying." "And now?" Helena asked, though she knew the answer. "Now I know that loving people, building something with them, that is what makes life worth living," Marcus said. "Even knowing that someday we will lose each other, that loss is worth the time we have together." Helena felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, Marcus could still move her with his quiet wisdom. "I love you," she said. "Thank you for giving me shelter when I needed it." "Thank you for staying," Marcus replied, "for choosing this life with me." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the mountains darken against the sunset. From inside the house came the sound of one of the twins calling for water and Matthew's patient voice responding. Their life was not perfect or easy, but it was real and it was theirs. Helena thought back to the night of the fire, to standing in the street with nothing. If someone had told her then that the disaster would lead to this, to a love like Marcus's and a family and a ranch and a life full of purpose, she would not have believed them. But here she was, living proof that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked. "How lucky I am," Helena said simply. Marcus smiled and kissed her hand. "We both are." As the years continued to pass, Marcus and Helena settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long marriage. They had weathered hard times and celebrated good ones, had raised their children and built a successful ranch, and through it all their love had only deepened. They knew each other's habits and quirks, could communicate with just a look, and still enjoyed each other's company after decades together. Matthew married a local girl when he was 23 and took over most of the ranch operations, though Marcus still helped when he could. The twins both attended school in Denver but returned home often. Sarah eventually becoming a teacher, and Emily opening a dress shop, continuing her mother's legacy in a new way. When Helena and Marcus became grandparents for the first time, they were both overcome with joy. Holding Matthew's son in his arms, Marcus felt the circle complete. He had been given shelter when he needed it most by Mr. Carter. He had given shelter to Helena when she needed it. Now they were surrounded by family, by legacy, by proof that lives could be rebuilt and purposes could be found. "What should they call us?" Helena asked, looking at her grandson with wonder. "I think Grandpa and Grandma will do just fine," Marcus said. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house and barns that Helena and Marcus had built together were now surrounded by smaller homes where Matthew and his family lived. The ranch had grown to over 2,000 acres, a testament to decades of hard work. During the party, Tom, who had worked for them for over 20 years, raised a toast. "To Marcus and Helena," he said, "who showed all of us what it means to build something lasting through hard work and love." Everyone cheered and drank, and Helena felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. Marcus put his arm around her and pulled her close. "Are you crying?" he teased gently. "Happy tears," Helena said. "I am just overwhelmed by how blessed we are." "We earned this," Marcus said. "Every bit of it. Through hard work and determination, and refusing to give up when things were difficult." That night, lying in bed in the house they had built together, Helena and Marcus reflected on their journey. "You remember that first night in the cabin?" Helena asked. "When you gave me your mother's dress and slept on the floor?" "I remember," Marcus said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, standing there having lost everything but refusing to break." "I remember thinking you were the kindest," Helena countered. "Offering shelter to a stranger when you had no obligation to help." "It was the best decision I ever made," Marcus said. "For me too," Helena agreed. "Taking shelter from a cowboy I did not know, trusting that he meant what he said." They lay quietly for a moment, then Marcus spoke again. "When I built that cabin all those years ago, I thought I would live there alone for the rest of my life. I had accepted that loneliness was my fate after losing my parents. Then you came into my life and everything changed. You gave me more than shelter," Helena said softly. "You gave me a reason to believe in second chances. You showed me that losing everything could actually be the beginning of something better." "We gave each other that," Marcus said, echoing words Helena had spoken years before. "We saved each other and built something neither of us could have built alone." Helena turned in his arms so she could see his face in the moonlight coming through the window. His hair was gray now and his face more lined, but his eyes were the same steady blue-gray that had given her comfort on the worst day of her life. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you from that first week in the cabin, even though I was too scared to admit it." "I love you too," Marcus replied. "Every day, more than the day before." They kissed, a sweet and gentle kiss that spoke of decades of intimacy and affection. Then they settled into sleep, wrapped around each other as they had been for 25 years. As Helena drifted off, she thought about the fire one more time. That night had seemed like the end of everything, the destruction of all her plans and dreams. But it had actually been the beginning. The fire had burned away her old life and made room for this new one, this better one, this life full of love and purpose and belonging. She had lost everything in that fire. And in losing everything, she had found exactly what she needed. Marcus had given her shelter, and she had given him purpose. And together they had built a life that mattered. In the morning, Helena woke to find Marcus already up, standing at the window looking out at the ranch. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist, and together they watched the sun rise over the mountains. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Marcus said. "That I get to spend another day with you." Helena smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "The feeling is entirely mutual." They stood there together as the light grew stronger, illuminating the land they had claimed and cultivated, the buildings they had constructed, the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. Matthew was already out checking the cattle. They could see him in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney of his house where his wife was probably making breakfast for their children. The twins would arrive later that day for Sunday dinner, as they did most weeks. This was legacy, Helena thought. Not just the physical ranch or the sewing business Emily had taken over, but the love that had built it all. The decision Marcus had made years ago to offer help to a stranger. The decision Helena had made to trust him and stay. All the decisions they had made together to keep building even when things were hard. "You have any regrets?" Marcus asked, still looking out at the dawn. Helena thought about her dress shop, about the life she had planned before the fire. She thought about the woman she had been then, so focused on independence and self-sufficiency that she had not left room for anything else. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "Everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Agreed." They spent the morning working together as they had for decades. Marcus handled ranch business while Helena worked on a quilt she was making for Matthew's next baby. They came together for lunch, sharing food and conversation, completely comfortable with each other. In the afternoon, the twins arrived with their families, filling the house with noise and laughter. Sarah's husband was a rancher from the next county over, and they had 3 boys who immediately ran outside to help their Uncle Matthew with the cattle. Emily's husband was a lawyer in Denver, and they had one daughter who attached herself to Helena, begging to learn to sew. As Helena showed her granddaughter how to thread a needle, she felt the circle completing again. She was passing on skills that had saved her life, that had helped her build independence and security. But more than that, she was passing on the knowledge that what really mattered was not the business or the money, but the connections between people. The way families supported each other. The way strangers could become saviors. The way love could rebuild what fire destroyed. At dinner, the large table Marcus had built years ago was crowded with family. Matthew sat at one end with his wife beside him, their children squirming in their chairs. The twins and their families filled the middle, everyone talking and laughing and reaching for food. Marcus sat at the head of the table with Helena beside him, and they shared a look of complete contentment. "I would like to make a toast," Matthew said, standing. Everyone quieted and looked at him. "To my parents who built all of this from nothing, who showed us what it means to work hard and love completely, who taught us that helping others is never wasted effort and that family is everything." He raised his glass. "To Ma and Pa." "To Ma and Pa," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Helena felt tears threatening again, and Marcus squeezed her hand under the table. She looked around at all the faces, at the children and grandchildren, at the life that had grown from that one terrible night when everything burned. After dinner, as the sun began to set, Helena and Marcus escaped to their porch as the family cleaned up inside. It was their ritual, their time together, and everyone knew to give them these moments. "Another good day," Marcus said, settling into his chair. "Another perfect day," Helena corrected, taking the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple. From inside came the sound of the grandchildren laughing and the twins teasing each other. Matthew was singing one of the old cowboy songs Marcus had taught him. It was the sound of family, of home, of a life well lived. "Helena," Marcus said softly. "Yes. Thank you for agreeing to marry me all those years ago, for taking a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a cabin and a dream." Helena reached over and took his hand. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible," she said, "for giving me shelter when I had nowhere to go, for loving me when I had nothing to offer but myself." "You were never nothing," Marcus said fiercely. "You were everything. You just did not know it yet." "You showed me," Helena said. You gave me more than shelter, Marcus. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything that matters." "We gave each other that," Marcus said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it. "We saved each other, remember?" "I remember," Helena said. They sat holding hands as darkness fell and stars began to appear. Inside the house, someone lit the lamps and warm light spilled out onto the porch. The family's voices rose in a song, Marcus's old song, and without discussing it, Helena and Marcus stood and went inside to join them. This was their life. This was what had been built from the ashes of that fire so many years ago. One moment of kindness from a cowboy who offered shelter. One moment of courage from a woman who accepted it. And from those 2 moments, everything else had grown. Helena looked at Marcus as they entered the warm, crowded house, and she smiled. He smiled back, the same steady, serious smile that had first made her feel safe. Then he took her hand and led her into the circle of family, into the life they had built together, into the home that would always be theirs. The fire had taken everything from Helena Abbott on that March night in 1878. But sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to find what really matters. Marcus Cole had given her shelter when she needed it most, and in doing so, he had found his purpose. Together, they had built something that would last for generations, a legacy of love and hard work, and the simple truth that sometimes strangers become family and disasters become blessings and endings become beginnings. As Helena stood surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her hand firmly held in Marcus's, she knew with absolute certainty that every moment of loss and fear and uncertainty had been worth it. This life, this love, this family was worth everything. And it had all started with one simple act of kindness from a cowboy who chose to help when he did not have to. That was the real legacy, Helena thought. Not the ranch or the businesses or even the family, though all of those mattered. The real legacy was the reminder that one person's choice to care, to offer help, to open their heart despite fear of loss, could change everything. Marcus had changed her life with his offer of shelter. She had changed his by accepting it and staying. And together, they had created something beautiful from the ashes. As the evening drew to a close and the family began to disperse to their respective homes, Helena and Marcus stood on the porch waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, they turned to each other. "Shall we go inside?" Marcus asked. "In a moment," Helena said. "I want to stand here with you a little longer." So they stood on the porch of the house they had built, looking out at the ranch they had created, and Helena sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the fire that had destroyed her old life and made room for this infinitely better one. She had lost everything that night. And in losing everything, she had gained the whole world. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, and Helena leaned into his warmth, just as she had on that first ride to his cabin 25 years ago. Some things changed over the years, but some things remained constant. Marcus's steadiness, his kindness, his love, those had been there from the beginning and they would be there until the end. "I love you," Helena said one more time. "I love you too," Marcus replied, as he had countless times before and would countless times again. They stood together under the stars, 2 people who had saved each other and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they always had, just as they always would, forever.